Hello, I'm Reverend Kenny Callahan, the pastor of Metropolitan Community Church of Richmond. This coming Sunday is the third Sunday and the final Sunday of our sermon series, The Spiritual Practice of Sabbath. The sacred texts for this coming Sunday are taken from Deuteronomy, the 15th chapter, verses 1 and 2, and then verses 7 to 11, and then Luke's story, chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. The Deuteronomy passage gives us a little snippet of the concept of the biblical Jubilee year. You can find a whole explanation of the Jubilee year in Exodus 21. Basically, the Jubilee year was a time of rebalancing and reconnecting. You worked and worked and worked hard for 49 years, and then in the 50th year, you rested. It was a Sabbath, but on a much, much bigger scale. Instead of just a day of rest, you had an entire year. Can you imagine that? In this year, all leased land was returned to its original owner, and any material things that were rented were given back to the loaner. All financial debts were absolutely, completely forgiven. All slaves were set free, and all of that kind of stuff. The main point of the Jubilee year was not the nitty-gritty of the details. The point was liberation. Liberation in a very real and practical way. Liberation from debts and from loans. The Jubilee year offers different kinds of liberation too. Social and emotional liberation, a liberation from the human structures and systems of inequality, injustice, and marginalization. In a lot of ways, this Sabbath year shifted the entire thought of ownership and property. It gave ownership and relationship absolutely new meaning. In this new way of thinking, this required the people of Israel to focus on and to also rely on God's power and the relationship within their community. It reminded them of God's ability to work and move in the world, not relying on their own abilities. It was God's way of teaching that Sabbath is one of the things that can help us refocus our perspective by reminding us that the debts and burdens that we carry are not the end-all in life, and that control over others and their resources is not the goal either. These things just get in the way of our relationships with each other and with God. And then the parable of the prodigal son in Luke's story also reminds us of this exact thing about relationships and liberation. I've always loved this story for a lot of reasons. But what I love the most is the image of the father and the son meeting on the road, where the father is embracing the son with welcome and welcoming home with open arms of welcome. This picture is what grace and love are all about. This parable is a reminder of what grace is in action. It's an act from God, an act that claims, names, and celebrates us as God's beloved by erasing all the stuff that gets in the way of our relationship with God and others. Those divisions and the boundaries, the burdens and the pain. Grace is welcoming, open and loving arms that say, welcome home. Sabbath is all about liberation, and the Jubilee year captures just how radical a change it is to embrace this concept. It also offers us a chance to remember that because of God's grace and in and through grace, we are liberated and free to embrace relationships to embrace God and to embrace one another. This is God's invitation to rest, to interrupt and to dismiss the temptation to try to earn our way into relationship with the divine and the lives of others by working harder and harder. Instead, God interrupts that cycle and comes to each and every one of us, welcoming us into the embrace of the divine. It's radical and it's life-changing and it changes the world. And it's God's way of saying, I love you, welcome home.